I think that this government would have more flexibility in financial markets than they currently think, as long as they can present a programme that looks as though the investment is going to be worthwhile. So my hope is that what she's doing is warming people up for some slightly bad news, but that when she's looked at the investment plans and decided on the ones she really wants to support, that perhaps we can adjust the borrowing targets, because I really do think that would make sense.
Yes. The Chancellor Rachel Reeves is reportedly genuinely shocked at the £20 billion hole in the country's finances, which many pointed out pre-election. You remember that Labour's election campaign reply to this was often, "We'll grow the economy." But now it seems cuts are coming. Public buildings will be sold off, infrastructure projects will be paused, departments will be weaned off expensive consultants. Does that all add up, though? In a moment, Howard Davies, the former chair of RBS and a former deputy governor of the Bank of England. But first, Times Radio's political editor, Kate McCann. Morning, Kate. What are we expecting from the Chancellor today?
Well, we're expecting a statement in the House of Commons this afternoon and then a press conference where Rachel Reeves will set out the results of essentially an audit that she asked for when the Labour Party became the government just over 20 odd days ago. And that document is going to suggest that things are worse than Labour had expected. Now, it's important that we kind of put these figures into the right places, if you like, because what Rachel Reeves is going to say is that the government has overspent in this year on projects which it had announced but not officially allocated money to. That's quite separate to the money that we were already talking about in the campaign, and we had put a figure on, which relates to public spending in the years ahead. So Labour knows that it's got this huge black hole in public spending. It affects unprotected government departments really more than any others. That's things like justice and local government. This, Rachel Reeves says, is on top of that money, and it relates to projects including things like connecting smaller rail lines back up with larger branch lines. It's things like road projects, which include a sort of bypass, if you like, around Stonehenge. And it's projects that the government had allocated time to, but not officially given the money to. And Rachel Reeves says things are far worse than she expected. And we're going to see some cuts and some scaling back of those projects as a result.
And politically, there's been some chatter today and yesterday suggesting that what she's doing here in part is laying the groundwork for some kind of tax rises or something in the autumn when she has a budget. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit bigger than that. I think Labour isn't just managing their expectations of the public when it comes to public spending, but also of new Labour MPs. We've seen a little bit of that. In the early days of this government, Labour has suspended the whip from 7 of its MPs who essentially called on the government to scrap the 2-child benefit cap. That, Keir Starmer says, would be something he would want to do, but it costs around £2 to £3 billion. So it comes with a huge price tag. It's not affordable right now. I think there's got to be some management of expectations. Look, part of this happens with any new government. They come in, they say things are really, really bad. And as a result, most new governments look to raise taxes in their first budgets. And they do that to fund all the things that they've promised in their manifesto. What's slightly different about this Labour government is the manifesto was, in theory, already costed. And it wasn't overly ambitious in terms of some of those really big long-term projects. It was quite cautious. And that's because Labour, Rachel Reeves, is sticking to really tight financial rules and is pinning a lot of hope on growth. I think that growth point is going to be really important in the months to come because growth means investment. It often means infrastructure investment. And a lot of the things that Rachel Reeves is going to cancel or scale back sound like they are infrastructure investments. So what is the government going to do to achieve that growth quickly in order to get the economy moving again?
Yes. Kate, thank you for that. That's Kate McCann, Times Radio's political editor. Let's bring in Howard Davies, a former chair of the Royal Bank of Scotland and a former deputy governor of the Bank of England. Morning. Thank you for making time for us. You're also actually a historian of modern chancellors as well. I mean,
yes.
Do you see this as being just in a long tradition of what chancellors have always done, taking office and saying, oh no, it's a lot worse than we thought, let's blame it all on the previous lot?
Yeah, I think Kate made a good point that this is a fairly normal bit of chancellorial choreography, if you like. But there are, I think, a few differences, and it has slightly surprised me that she has decided to lead on cutting infrastructure projects, given what the government says about growth, and given that the investment rate of the government in this country has been remarkably low for a number of years. Private sector investment's been low as well. So I do think that's a surprise. But maybe it's that she hasn't yet articulated a case for a bit more flexibility on government borrowing, which I personally believe would be possible. So I think we're getting
In what way?
drip fed here.
In what way could she be more flexible on borrowing if she says she's not going to borrow more, and they've got these fiscal rules that they want to get debt falling, as a proportion of GDP at the end of 5 years and all the rest of it? I mean, how could she wiggle out of that?
Those targets are arbitrary. I mean, they're self-imposed, and they don't make a whole lot of economic sense, frankly. To say that your main objective in government is to get the borrowing down in year 4 to 5 of your parliament, it is a very peculiar thing. And I think that this government would have more flexibility in financial markets than they currently think, as long as they can present a program that looks as though the investment is going to be worthwhile. So my hope is that what she's doing is warming people up for some slightly bad news, but that when she's looked at investment plans and decided on the ones she really wants to support, that perhaps we can adjust the borrowing targets, because I really do think that would make sense.
Yes, and when we talk about the infrastructure projects which she's expected to scrap, what's reported are things like the planned tunnel for the A303 under Stonehenge, and the A27 Arundel bypass and bits and bobs like that. Interestingly, though, elsewhere, one of the things she wants to save a bit of money on is the government's reliance on consultants, which increased quite a bit post-Brexit and also post-pandemic. Deloitte has won contracts worth 1.9 billion. KPMG, EY and PwC have 1.3, 1.03 and 1 billion pound contracts, respectively. I mean, what does it tell us about the state of government staffing and expertise that we're shelling this much on sort of outside short-term help?
Yes, I had time to reflect on this as I sat in a long queue on the A303 past Stonehenge on Friday afternoon. I think that there is a problem in government in that if you starve the government of full-time staff or cut their pay in real terms, which is what's been going on, then you end up inevitably attracting more external support, because you do need to do things, and government departments haven't got a way of doing it unless they do consultancy work. So I think this is probably a good idea to have a review of where we've got to, and I guess it'll probably be linked to the fact that they look as if they're going to accept the recommendations of the pay review bodies. So if you do that, you can say, look, we are now going to pay a respectable market rate, and therefore we can recruit full-time staff and we can use consultants less. I think that makes a lot of sense. How much you get out of that in the next 6 months or 12 months is a bit doubtful, frankly. But as a direction of travel, I think it does make sense.
Okay, and again, thinking about the direction of travel then, do you think all this shakes down to job almost done if we add growth in, or, as some are expecting, and as Kate was hinting to earlier on, can we expect some kind of tax rises in the autumn? Should we? The things that have been talked about, things like equalising the rate of capital gains with income tax, increasing the rate of inheritance tax, and actually reforming pensions tax relief as well. Do you think they should be on the table?
Well, I think there's two things here. One is the absolute level of the tax take, and second is the structure of the tax system. The structure of our tax system is ridiculous, I'm afraid. It has suffered from neglect over some successive governments, frankly. We've got a council tax, a property tax regime that was invented in a huge rush in 1991 by Michael Heseltine, designed to plug a gap left by the end of the poll tax. It's never been reformed since. It's crazy. So I think that we can, and I indeed hope we will expect some decent reforms to the tax system. Now, absolutely how much you need to raise, I suspect they do need to raise some more. And I was disappointed personally that they ruled out increases in any of the major tax rates in the run up to the election. I think they could have hinted at some further tax rises and not have lost their majority. bluntly. So they're going to have to do it in a slightly roundabout way, but I do think that they will have, one, to reform the system, and two, to raise a bit more money.
Yes, well, we'll hear from Rachel Reeves at 3:30 p.m. today. While we've got you, just finally, you're a former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England. We're expecting on Thursday a decision on interest rates. Do you expect them to be cut? And if they are, does that mean that we should forgive the bank for its maybe late raising of interest rates, as some saw it, as inflation was starting to creep up?
Yeah, well, I thought they were late to start. I think they were about 6 months late to start. And I fear now that they may be a bit late to start cutting. I personally would now favour a small cut, even though service inflation is higher, but the overall inflation rate is at the target. I don't think we can expect rates to fall sharply, but I think just a kind of hint that the bank is, getting close to having done its job would be a helpful thing this week. So that's what I'd be hoping for. And that would, of course, help the growth prospects, which would help making the sums that we've just been talking about public spending a little bit more manageable.
It might mean you have a quicker journey down the A303 in the future, perhaps. Howard Davies, good to talk to you. Thank you very much, former chair of RBS.